It can sometimes be confusing for cat parents to figure out what is the best food to feed their cats or what are the ingredients they should be avoiding because they're dangerous. And in fact, there's not a lot of consensus out there on these ingredients because there's so many different opinions. So in this video, I, Dr. Sarah Wooten, am going to give you a small animal veterinarian's opinion on 9 controversial cat food ingredients. And then I'm going to give you my personal opinion on whether you should avoid them or not. Okay, number 1 controversial ingredient, artificial colors. Artificial colors are, you'll see them in the ingredient listed as such, the color, and then it has a number after it. So red and then a number, or blue then a number, or yellow then a number. And so these are chemically synthetic colors that are added to the food to increase its visual appearance, not to the pet, because the pet doesn't care, but to the person buying the food, you. So if you buy a food and you see like little green kibbles or yellow kibbles or red kibbles, you're like, oh, that's better. Well, it's actually not. So my opinion is to avoid foods that have artificial colors in them. And you'll find that most, if not all, of the high-end foods don't have artificial colors, and most of the really inexpensive foods that you'll find in the grocery aisles do have artificial colors in them. Number 2, this is a big controversial one, plant protein. I'm talking about corn, wheat, and soybeans. These are all plants that actually have protein and are sometimes used in pet foods to increase the protein amount. The problem with them, I think, when you're using them for protein and not for a carbohydrate source, is that cat systems are not really designed to use plant protein for protein. They are obligate carnivores, which means that they have to get some of their essential amino acids from eating animal protein. So I'm okay with plants protein if it's put in there to help formulate the kibble, because you must have carbohydrates in order to have kibble stick together. Otherwise, it's just gonna fall apart. I'm okay with that, and I'm also okay with it when it's used as a carbohydrate source, but when it's used as a protein source, it's pretty controversial, and I'm actually not a fan. So how do you know whether this plant protein is being used or if it's animal protein, if you see both in the ingredient list? Well, generally speaking, the higher up in the ingredient list that you see an ingredient, the larger volume it has in the overall formulation. So I always look for recognizable animal protein sources in the first 3 to 5 ingredients, especially maybe 1 or 2 or 3. That's really important to see animal protein or egg, something like that. And don't forget that plant protein can look a lot of different ways in the ingredient list. It can be listed as whole ground corn, cornmeal, corn, wheat gluten, lots of different ways. But if it looks like a plant, it is a plant, so make sure it's staying out of those first couple of ingredients. Number 3 controversial ingredient is plant oil as a primary or sole source of fat in the formulation. And the main oil that I see used is soybean oil. So again, cats are not really designed to use plant proteins or fat. Wild cats and our cats do consume some plants, because if they are hunting prey, they'll be consuming whatever is in the stomach of that prey. And whatever's in the stomach of that prey is usually a plant material. So fiber is important. But when it comes to fat source, I want to see an animal fat source. Number 4, byproduct meal as a controversial ingredient. People either love or they hate byproduct meal, I have decided. So what are animal byproducts? Well, what happens when an animal is slaughtered for food is that the human grade portions, all of the meat portions, are set aside, but then there's still a lot left of the animal that hasn't been used. And these are usually internal organs, things like stomach, spleen, lungs, intestines, liver, lots of different cuttings and different parts of the animal. So what happens is these parts are then processed and put into a meal, and it's called byproduct meal. Sometimes it has an actual animal name, chicken byproduct, beef byproduct, whatever. Sometimes it's just, animal byproduct because they throw a bunch of animals in at the same time. I think where the misconception comes is that people think that hooves and feathers and things like that, which is considered animal feed if you look it up, are used as part of animal byproduct, but generally speaking, it's not. And byproduct meal can be very nutritious for animals. And if you think about what they're eating in the wild, they'll consume the entire animal. So is it a lower quality animal protein source? Not necessarily, which is why it's controversial. So what do you do if you see a byproduct meal on the ingredient list? Really, that's up to you and your personal preference. There are lots of pet food products out there that have byproduct. There's lots that don't. It's really down to your personal preference. Remember that the foods are all formulated to certain standards. So I don't really have an opinion on whether you should avoid byproduct meal unless your pet is not thriving on the diet. Then I say, hey, we need to feed your pet something that they will thrive on. So that's number 4. My jury is still out on that. What are your thoughts? Number 5 controversial ingredient that you will see in pet foods is titanium dioxide. Titanium dioxide is an ingredient that is used to whiten food. And generally speaking, I do see it in the cheaper pet foods versus the higher end pet foods when I go and I look through ingredient lists. Even though the FDA recognizes it as generally safe, other organizations have issued warnings, such as the European Food Safety Authority. They have concluded that titanium dioxide should not be considered safe as a food additive because it may cause inflammation and it may be toxic to the nervous system. The International Agency for Research on Cancer has listed titanium dioxide as a group 2B carcinogen, which is an agent that might be carcinogenic but lacks sufficient animal and human research. My personal opinion on whether you should avoid it, I would say probably avoid it because it's better to be safe than sorry. And even though we don't know something for certain, there might be enough anecdotal evidence out there to suggest it might not be the best ingredient. And why do we need to be whitening pet foods anyways? That's just for people. The pets don't care at all. So my recommendation, avoid foods that have titanium dioxide listed in the ingredient list. Okay, the next controversial ingredient, dun dun dun, is Menadione or vitamin K3, which is synthetic vitamin K. We know that vitamin K3 is harmful to humans. However, the synthetic vitamin hasn't demonstrated harm to livestock or pets when added to feed in regulated doses. This is from the FDA. But there's still controversy over whether vitamin K3 or Menadione should be allowed in pet food, with some companies who don't add it claim superiority over the companies that do add it because they're using a natural vitamin K versus a synthetic vitamin K. I am thinking that it's probably best to go with a natural vitamin K versus a synthetic because we do know that it's harmful in humans. And there's a lot of crossover, especially between dogs and humans. Cats and humans, not so much. But I mean, we're all mammals. So if it's hurting one mammal, maybe it's hurting another. So my recommendation is if you're concerned about it at all, or if your pet isn't thriving on the diet, let's get them on something that has natural vitamin K. If your pet's doing great on the food and it has Menadione in it, the decision really is up to you. So I think it's a controversial food. I don't really think about this ingredient that much until I see more research behind whether it's actually harmful to cats or not, but you should know the information. The number 7 controversial ingredient is legumes. Legumes are things like peas, chickpeas, things like that. And why are these controversial? Well, again, they're plant proteins. So a lot of your grain-free diets use legumes in place of grain or wheat. And the reason they do this is because you have to have some sort of carbohydrate to keep the kibble together. And legumes seem to be a nice substitute for grain and wheat since nobody liked grain or wheat or corn anymore. The problem with legumes is that they shouldn't be the primary source of protein in a cat's diet. though they still can provide supplemental protein and fiber. We want them to eat animal proteins. And like all plants, legumes contain lectins, which are substances that the plant produces to protect itself against pests and other microorganisms. But lectins can trigger inflammation, and they are hard to digest. And cats, again, are not designed to digest legumes. And if you look at the grain-free diets, you're going to see a lot of legumes. And a couple of years ago, there was actually a lot of controversy surrounding legumes in pet foods because there was a theory that they were linked to heart disease in pets. That theory has since kind of simmered down because they haven't really found a link between the particular heart disease, it's dilated cardiomyopathy, and legumes. But still, it's enough to make you go, So I don't like legumes in a cat diet. That's my personal opinion, and that's why this is a little bit controversial, because there's other people that have different opinions about it. But if you are concerned at all, I would avoid diets that contain legumes. The number 8 controversial pet food ingredient is called PFA, which stands for poly or perfluoroalkyl substances. And this is not actually an ingredient that is used in pet food, but it's used in pet food packaging. And the reason this is controversial because people have different opinions again on it, but I'm going to go with what the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, says. And what the EPA says is that PFAs are widely used, long-lasting chemicals that break down very slowly over time. They make it so that packaging keeps pet food fresh, which is good, but they actually have had scientific studies that shown to exposure to some of these PFAs may be linked to harmful health effects in humans and in animals. There are thousands of different PFA chemicals found in many different consumer products, including pet food packaging. And we don't completely understand the impact of these chemicals, and we don't completely understand the effect of these chemicals on the health of pets and people, which is why they're controversial. So my personal opinion is I would avoid the use of products that contain PFA in the packaging. How do you know? Well, sometimes you have to contact the company because they probably, unless they're proud that they don't have it in their packaging, they probably don't advertise it anywhere. If you're uncertain as to whether your cat food's packaging contains it, contact the company and ask them. And the number 9 controversial ingredient in pet food is some more synthetic preservatives that are used to keep pet food fresh, and they include BHA, BHT, and ethoxyquin. And so we actually do have a fair amount of science that these chemicals have been linked to allergic reactions as well as kidney and liver damage in cats when they're given at high doses. And then some studies actually show that BHA is a potential carcinogen. Ethoxyquin is a chemical preservative in the food that was initially registered as a pesticide, and it's approved for use in pet foods to preserve foods, but it's been banned in Europe and Australia. So scientific evidence about ethoxyquin is inconclusive, but it still remains a controversial ingredient. My thoughts on BHA and BHT and ethoxyquin are I would probably avoid them if I were you. There are enough natural preservatives that are used in food, such as vitamin E, which is a wonderful preservative, that can keep food fresh without using these potentially harmful synthetic substances. So there you have it. There is my list of 9 controversial pet food and pet label ingredients and my personal opinion on each one of them. So I would like to know what your thoughts are on these ingredients, or if you think that there's some that are missing from the list, or if you have any other thoughts about it. I love to see what the comment section is saying because you guys are our pet parents and we want to hear what you're saying. The bottom line is I always recommend that pet parents buy the best food that they can afford for their pet. And if that is the best you can do, then that is the best you can do, and that is all right. I also say that we know a pet food is helping a pet if the pet is thriving on it. If you're feeding your pet the most expensive boutique food that you can find, but your pet is still having problems, well, maybe you need to get something different. So it's important that you get the best that you can afford and that your pet thrives on the food. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon with more information on cat healthcare.